I always believed that Laura and I had something close to unshakable. Not some fairy tale, not fireworks every day, but a bond. A rhythm. A life that felt dependable. We'd been married for 10 years, and in that time, our house just outside Austin had become the center of our world. I worked long hours as an engineer for a civil design firm while Laura traveled a lot for her job planning corporate events. She was good at it, always polished, always 5 steps ahead. I admired that about her. I trusted that about her. That's probably why I didn't question things at first. She had just gotten back from a 3-day trip to Savannah. Said it was for a client's regional conference. When she walked through the front door, roller bag in tow, she looked calm. Not tired or excited, just settled. Like she'd come back from a spa, not a work trip. I gave her a quick hug, asked how the flight was, and she offered a clipped, not bad. Could have been worse. Then she went upstairs to unpack, already scrolling through her phone. I didn't think too much of it. We had grown into a certain kind of silence over the years. Not cold, just familiar. But later that evening, when I went outside to grab something from her car, her keys had fallen behind the couch. I opened the glove box and saw it. A folded sheet of paper, not hidden, just wedged under her wallet. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was an invoice. Standard hotel stationery. The kind with a fancy crest and overly polite font. My eyes scanned the details automatically. The Cottonwood Inn, Savannah. A double occupancy room. Check-in on Monday, check-out on Thursday. Paid in full by someone named Jason Sloan. I stared at the name, letting it sink in. Jason Sloan. The name rang a faint bell. Then it hit me, he was a client of hers. I'd heard it before, in passing. Back when she still talked to me about work. I stood there a while with the paper in my hand, the car door still open, her keys hanging from the ignition. My mind wasn't racing, more like shutting down piece by piece. I walked back inside and laid the invoice flat on the kitchen table. When she came down 20 minutes later in yoga pants and a t-shirt like it was any other night, she glanced at it without flinching. Picked up the paper, scanned it, and with the most casual shrug I'd ever seen, said, "The client booked a double." I didn't choose it. Then she moved toward the fridge. Just like that. I wanted to ask more, wanted to ask why a client would book a double or why she hadn't mentioned it. But I didn't. I just nodded like a coward. She grabbed a soda and left the paper where it was. I watched her go into the living room, flop onto the couch, and start scrolling again. Probably checking Instagram or replying to work emails. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just discovered something that didn't add up. That night, I lay in bed next to her and stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was the beginning of something or the moment I finally started noticing what had been there all along. Her breathing was soft and steady beside me, the room lit only by the blinking light of her phone charging on the nightstand. I didn't sleep much. There had been other moments over the past year that I had brushed off, rationalized. Late-night texts she never explained. Work trips that came up suddenly. The way she'd stop telling me about her day. The way her face would light up when a certain name popped up on her phone and how quickly she'd turn it face down. It wasn't just the invoice. That was just the first piece of paper I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I made coffee for both of us. She smiled when she came into the kitchen, kissed my cheek, and said, "Thanks, babe." Like nothing had shifted. But something had. Something had cracked open. She chatted about her meetings while I watched her carefully, nodding in the right places but barely registering her words. I was trying to detect any tremble, any pause, any guilt. But she was smooth. Rehearsed. She even laughed once and told me about a drunk VP who tried to do a backflip during the client dinner. "Sounds like a wild night," I said, testing her. She grinned. "You have no idea." I smiled back, but inside I was ice. Because that night, the one with the backflipping VP, was also the night listed on the hotel invoice. Double room. Jason Sloan. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that. For the rest of the day, I found myself watching her. Not in an obvious way, just little glances. The way she picked up her phone. The way she texted with the screen tilted slightly away. The way she laughed a little too hard at something she was reading and then immediately locked the phone when she saw me looking. I went outside and mowed the lawn just to have something to do, but my thoughts stayed stuck in that hotel invoice, in that name. Jason Sloan. Double occupancy. A part of me still wanted to believe it was nothing. A misunderstanding. Some weird mix-up with the hotel or a practical decision made by the client's office. But another part, the quieter, more cynical part, had already started rewriting memories. Like the time she told me her phone died during a trip, but I saw her liking posts on Facebook. Or how she started showering late at night when she used to be a morning person. or how she hadn't initiated anything romantic in, I couldn't even remember how long. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I started replaying conversations in my head, trying to catch the lies in hindsight, trying to decide if I had missed something obvious or if she had just become better at hiding things. And all the while, I couldn't shake the image of that hotel invoice sitting there on the kitchen table, right between us like a third person we both pretended not to see. After Laura went to bed that night, I stayed downstairs. I told her I was finishing up some reports for work, but in reality, I just needed space. To think, to breathe, to start stitching together the pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was working on. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the walls settling. It was the kind of silence that made your own thoughts feel deafening. I sat in the armchair by the window and stared out into the night. The neighborhood was dark, still, as if nothing could possibly be wrong in the world. But inside my chest, there was this dull, gnawing throb. Not anger, not yet, just unease. My mind started rewinding, unspooling little clips from the last year. Moments that hadn't seemed like anything back then, but now they flickered with new meaning. Started with her phone. That was the first change. A year ago, we used to toss our phones on the couch, table, wherever. Now hers was always close by, screen facing down. She used to text in front of me without a second thought. Lately, though, she would angle her body slightly when replying. She'd start texting with a smile and then snap the screen off if I got too close. There were nights when she'd step out onto the back porch to take calls. "It's work," she'd say, waving me off with a half smile. "Too loud in here." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was an event planner. Calls came in late, early, randomly. But now I remembered the way her voice would drop to a whisper, the way her tone shifted, suddenly lighter, warmer. That wasn't how she talked to clients. Then there was the story she told me about the conference in Dallas a few months ago. She said it was exhausting. Long days, brutal schedules. But when she texted me from the hotel that night, she sent a photo, one meant to be casual, showing off the fancy dinner spread. In the background, barely in frame, there was a man's arm resting on the edge of the table. A watch, a rolled-up dress shirt sleeve. And something about the watch, it stuck in my memory. I'd seen it before. On Rick, one of her coworkers. At the time, I laughed it off. Teased her about having dinner with Rick and his infamous spreadsheet rants. She just smirked and said, "Oh, that wasn't Rick. That was the regional VP." And that was the end of it. I didn't question it further. Why would I? Back then, I still thought honesty between us was a given. But now, every little detail felt suspicious. And it wasn't just her phone habits or vague conference stories. It was her entire energy around me. She used to vent about work constantly. I remember dreading Mondays because I knew I'd hear about every minor office drama in excruciating detail. But somewhere along the way, that stopped. She got quieter. When I asked how her day was, I'd get, "It was fine," or "Just the usual." She stopped volunteering stories, stopped laughing at her own work jokes. I started noticing that she didn't touch me as much anymore. No small shoulder squeezes in the kitchen. No brushing her hand through my hair when I laid my head in her lap. We'd sit on the couch together, but there was always a cushion between us. Not just physically, emotionally too. And me? I adjusted. I didn't press. I figured she was tired or stressed. I thought, let her be. She's going through something. I was trying to be a good partner. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who made everything about himself. I didn't want to be the guy who pushed. But now, looking back on it all, it felt like I'd been trained not to ask questions. I sat in that chair until the clock blinked past 1 a.m., just staring at nothing, looping through every red flag I'd ignored. The night she came home late from that team dinner and smelled like someone else's cologne. The weekend she said she needed to get away, to clear her head, and went to her sister's house, but never posted a single photo with her. And when I asked how her niece was doing, she paused for just a second too long before answering. There was also the time I caught her crying in the bathroom. I came home early from work after a project got delayed. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was silent. When I stepped inside, I heard the sound of running water upstairs. I assumed she was in the shower, but then I heard a muffled sob. I walked up, knocked gently, and asked if she was okay. She turned off the water and called out, "Just a headache. I'll be out in a sec." When she finally emerged, her eyes were red, but her face was composed. "Allergies," she said with a chuckle. I hugged her. I believed her. And now I hated that I did. I pulled out my phone and went back through her Instagram posts from the past few months. Nothing stood out at first glance. Plenty of event photos, location tags, cocktails at trendy rooftop bars. But when I looked closer, I realized something that made my chest tighten. She never tagged people anymore. Not since late last year. Before that, she used to tag her coworkers all the time. Group sh*ts inside jokes. Now it was all solo pics or photos with vague captions like, "Work hard, play harder," or "Another one for the books." I checked who liked her photos. Jason Sloan. That name again. The client whose name was on the hotel invoice. He'd liked almost every photo she posted for months. Sometimes he even left comments. Nothing outrageous, just emojis or "great work" or "love this view." But he was always there. I clicked on his profile. Public. I scrolled through his photos, golf courses, conference selfies, business class flights. But one photo caught my eye. It was from 3 weeks ago. A group dinner at a restaurant in downtown Houston. There were 8 people around the table, smiling, toasting wine glasses. And there was Laura, dead center, wearing the blue dress she told me she'd bought for a wedding. Her head tilted toward Jason, smiling up at him, his hand resting on the back of her chair. I didn't know what to do with the feeling that washed over me then. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity, like finally seeing the outline of a storm I'd been standing in for months. I put my phone down and stared at the shadows dancing across the living room wall. I thought about how many times I'd told myself to stop overthinking. How many times I'd said, "Don't be paranoid. Trust her." How many ways I'd talked myself out of listening to my gut. But now that inner voice, the one I'd silenced for so long, was screaming. Something was wrong. It had been wrong. And I had spent a year pretending not to see it. When I finally went upstairs, the room smelled like lavender. Laura always lit that candle when she wanted to sleep deeply. She was curled on her side, her back to my side of the bed, blankets drawn up around her shoulders. I slipped into bed quietly, trying not to wake her. Not because I didn't want her to know I was upset, but because I couldn't bear to look at her face right then. I couldn't trust what I'd see. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring into the dark. Something had changed. I couldn't explain it yet. Not in full, but I could feel it in my bones, like a low-frequency hum just beneath my skin. The air between us had shifted. The warmth was gone. And maybe, just maybe, it had been gone for a long time. The next morning, I told Laura I had an early meeting. She barely looked up from her coffee. "Good luck," she said, distracted by her phone, her thumbs flying. Probably another client crisis, or at least that's what she'd tell me. I nodded, grabbed my keys, and left. But I wasn't going to the office. The hotel invoice from Savannah was still in my jacket pocket, folded in thirds. I drove across town in silence, the radio off, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The city was already alive. Horns, morning joggers, people waiting for buses. But I felt apart from all of it, like I was watching life through a thick pane of glass. The Cottonwood Inn sat quietly at the edge of the historic district. It had that high-end charm, bricked walkway, hanging plants, soft jazz filtering out through the lobby. I parked on the street and walked in, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Behind the front desk was a young guy, probably mid-20s, hair too neat for someone that age. I cleared my throat and said the first thing that came to mind. "Hey, I think my wife and I left a charger here last week. Can you check if anything was turned in?" He smiled politely and asked for the name. "Laura Morgan," I said. "And I might have been listed as a guest too." He typed quickly, squinting at the screen. Then he looked up, still smiling, completely unaware that he was about to knock the air out of my lungs. "Room 208. Checked in Monday, Checked out Thursday morning. It was under Mrs. Morgan and Mr. Jason Sloan. I don't see any items left behind, but I can double-check lost and found if you'd like. No, that's fine, I managed. Thanks. I walked out into the sunlight, not feeling it at all. The sidewalk blurred beneath me and I don't even remember unlocking the car. I sat there in the front seat for what must have been an hour, staring at nothing. Jason Sloan. That name had gone from background noise to a siren. My mind replayed everything I tried to bury, the texts, the sudden trip extensions, the change in her tone when she talked about work. I tried to tell myself it was in my head, that I was just feeling insecure. But this wasn't a hunch anymore. This was real. I drove to a supermarket parking lot on the edge of town and parked far from the entrance. No one would bother me there. I turned off the engine but didn't move. My hands stayed on the wheel, gripping tighter and tighter until I realized I couldn't feel my fingers. It was like a part of me had snapped. Not with noise, not with fury, but with silence. That deep, hollow kind of breaking that doesn't even hurt right away because the shock is still taking up all the space. 10 years. 10 years of shared routines, holidays, Sunday morning pancakes, handwritten birthday cards. 10 years of small fights and inside jokes and lazy afternoons where I thought, this is it. This is home. And now I was sitting in a car, alone, realizing I hadn't really been home in a long time. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I felt the pressure behind my eyes, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was just this pounding in my chest, like my body was trying to make sense of a betrayal my brain still hadn't fully processed. She hadn't just lied. She'd taken something sacred, trust, and used it like currency with another man. And for what? For excitement? For escape? For the ego boost of being seen by someone who wasn't her husband? I opened my phone and stared at our wedding photo, the one I'd refused to remove from my lock screen. I tapped it, enlarged it. There she was, smiling up at me in that white dress, eyes full of joy. We looked happy. Not perfect, but real. I wondered if she'd been lying even then. I wondered when it had started, if there had ever been a moment where she looked at me and thought, I'd rather be with someone else. I wanted to call someone. My brother, maybe? Or Ben from work. But how do you start that conversation? Hey, remember how I always said Laura and I were rock solid? Turns out she's been sleeping with a client and lying to my face. No. I couldn't make the words real yet. I looked up and watched the cars come and go from the supermarket entrance. People with grocery lists. Moms with toddlers. Old couples helping each other across the lot. Everyone else seemed to know what they were doing, where they were going. And me? I was just a guy sitting in a car, trying not to fall apart. At some point, I took out the hotel invoice again. I traced the letters of her name with my thumb. The neat printing. The signature at the bottom. It all felt like a contract I never signed, a version of my marriage I never agreed to. The paper crinkled in my hand and I almost tore it up right there. But I didn't. I folded it back neatly and slid it into the glove box. Part of me wanted to burn it. Part of me needed to keep it. Eventually, I turned the key and started the car. I didn't know where to go. Home felt like enemy territory, but there wasn't anywhere else. So I drove aimlessly for a while, past parks, past diners, through neighborhoods that looked like ours. All of them filled with families and couples and people who probably didn't know how fast their lives could change. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun was starting to set. The house looked the same, down to the cracked porch tile and the hummingbird feeder she'd insisted on installing. For a second, I sat there staring at it, thinking, this house is a shell. Just drywall and routines. It doesn't mean anything if the truth inside it has been hollowed out. I walked in slowly. She was in the kitchen, heating something on the stove. Chicken curry, I think. She turned when she saw me, offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You okay? You look tired, she said. I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked past her, heading for the stairs. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. Every photo on the wall was now a question mark. Every souvenir from our travels looked like part of a stage set. I didn't know what was real anymore. What had been for me and what had been for show. Downstairs, I could hear her humming softly, something she always did when she cooked. That used to bring me comfort. Now it just felt eerie. Like hearing someone hum at a funeral. I stayed up that night, long after she'd gone to bed. I sat in the living room, lights off, listening to the house creak and sigh. I tried to picture my life 10 years ago, before her. Before any of this. I couldn't. She'd been part of everything. My anchor. My constant. But anchors can drag you down just as easily as they hold you steady. At some point, I lay down on the couch and closed my eyes. I didn't expect sleep. I just didn't want to be in that bed with her. And in the quiet, somewhere between exhaustion and numbness, I made a decision. Not about what to say. Not yet. But that I couldn't keep pretending. Not anymore. The next morning, I moved through the house like a ghost. I brushed my teeth, showered, got dressed, even made a piece of toast, but it was like I was watching myself go through the motions from a distance. Everything felt muted, drained of color. Laura was in the kitchen again, moving with that same effortless grace she always had. She smiled at me over her coffee like nothing had shifted. "Hey, you want scrambled or fried today?" she asked. I blinked at her, unsure how to respond. It wasn't a weird question in itself. She often made weekend breakfast, but after what I knew now, it sounded surreal. Like a line from a play I hadn't agreed to be in. "Fried's fine," I said finally. I watched her turn back to the stove, humming again, spatula tapping lightly against the pan. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the frying pan and throw it across the room. But instead, I sat down at the table and stared at my hands. She brought the plate over, kissed the top of my head, and sat down across from me. "Anything on your mind?" I looked up at her, and for a split second, I thought about asking. About holding up that hotel invoice again and shouting, "How could you?" But I didn't. Because I realized I already knew the answer. And I no longer wanted to hear her lie to me. Instead, I said, "Just tired." She nodded. "You've been working too hard." The irony of that statement didn't even register on her face. We ate in silence. I finished my eggs, took a sip of orange juice, and excused myself. I went upstairs, opened the closet, and pulled out a backpack. Not a suitcase, just something light. I didn't know where I was going yet. I just knew I wasn't staying here. I packed deliberately. A few t-shirts, a pair of jeans, socks, charger, shaving kit. I took my passport even though I wasn't going anywhere that required it. I guess part of me wanted the option. The freedom. The escape hatch. I looked around the room at all the little pieces of our life. The canvas print of our wedding vows hanging above the bed. The candle collection she was so proud of. The bookshelf filled with our favorites, mine on the bottom, hers on the top. I walked over to it and ran a finger along the spines. Everything so perfectly arranged, so curated. And so fake. Downstairs, she was humming again. Something slow and bluesy. It made my skin crawl. I walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs with my bag slung over my shoulder. She was bent over the dishwasher loading it. She turned when she heard me. "Where are you going?" she asked casually. "Out," I said. "Out where?" I paused. "Just out. I need some time." She tilted her head, confused. "Everything okay?" "No," I said. "But it will be." Her brow furrowed. "Is this about work? Or something else?" I looked her in the eye. "I think you know." Her mouth opened slightly like she was about to say something, but then she nodded once. Slowly. Like she didn't want to confirm anything but also couldn't deny it. I turned and walked to the door. She didn't follow me. She didn't ask me to stay. Outside, the air was warm and thick with the early signs of Texas summer. I got into the car and started driving with no destination. Just away. The road curved and the city peeled away behind me like skin shedding from something new and raw underneath. I ended up 2 hours south in a sleepy little coastal town I hadn't been to since college. There was an old motel with faded signs and peeling paint, but the guy at the front desk didn't ask questions when I paid for 3 nights in cash. The room smelled like mildew and salt, but it had a bed, a working lock, and no framed wedding photos. I sat on the edge of that bed and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for weeks. I didn't cry. Not yet. The sadness was there, but it was wrapped in something thicker. A kind of numbness. Like when your arm falls asleep and you know pain is coming, but for now there's just that strange buzzing. I went to the local cafe for dinner that night. It was small, quiet, with chipped mugs and laminated menus. I ordered a grilled cheese and a cup of coffee. The waitress asked if I was traveling for work. I said no. She didn't press. I sat by the window and watched the sun drop over the ocean, casting everything in the soft orange light. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt quiet inside. Not better. Not healed. But quiet. The next morning, I walked along the beach, shoes in hand, jeans rolled up. There were kids playing, dogs chasing tennis balls, old couples collecting shells. Life just going on, indifferent to my pain. I envied that. The simplicity of just being where you are, not where your head is. By the second day, I stopped checking my phone. I had no desire to read her messages, no interest in missed calls. I knew they'd be there. Excuses, apologies, vague emotional pleas. But I didn't need words anymore. I needed distance. Space. I sat on the motel balcony that night, sipping a beer from the vending machine downstairs and wrote in the notes app on my phone. Not a letter to her. Just a list. A list of all the things I'd lost and the things I hadn't even realized were missing. I wrote. Trust. Safety. The version of her I believed in. The version of me who trusted without fear. The warmth of coming home and knowing it meant something. Then I added, my dignity. Still intact. My instincts. Still sharp. My backbone. Coming back. My future. Mine again. The next morning I didn't pack. I stayed another night. And another. I wasn't running, I was reclaiming something. I didn't make any grand decisions yet. No calls to lawyers. No dramatic breakup texts. Just the quiet resolve of someone who knew, deep in his bones, that he couldn't live under the same roof with someone who saw commitment as convenience. That fourth morning, I got in the car and drove not back to Austin, but somewhere else. Somewhere I hadn't been in years. To my brothers. We hadn't spoken in a long time. Not since our father's funeral when we'd fought over something small and stopped talking altogether. But when he opened the door, he didn't ask questions. He just looked at me, bag in hand, sunburned, exhausted, and said, if you want to stay, stay. We sat on his porch that evening, beers in hand, watching the horizon fade from orange to deep purple. We didn't talk much. Just sat. And somehow that silence meant more than any apology. It didn't fix anything. But it gave me a place to land. It had been 2 days since I arrived at my brother's place. 2 days of early morning coffee, unspoken apologies, and short walks under wide Texas skies. We didn't talk much, just enough to keep the silence from growing too heavy. That was fine by me. I wasn't ready to dissect what I felt, not even to myself. The strange part wasn't the grief. It was the lack of it. I kept waiting for the emotional wave to crash, tears, shouting, maybe even breaking something. But instead, I felt like I was standing in the middle of a dried-up riverbed, staring at the cracked earth where water used to be. The absence of emotion was, in its own way, louder than the emotion itself. I spent most of my time in a local cafe not far from my brother's house. It was the kind of place that served pancakes all day and had handwritten chalkboard menus. I liked the simplicity. The staff knew me after just 2 visits. I always ordered the same thing: black coffee, blueberry muffin, glass of water. I'd sit near the window with a notebook open, pretending to write, mostly just watching people come and go. That evening, just as I was halfway through my second coffee, I saw her. Laura. She stepped into the cafe like someone entering a courtroom, eyes scanning the room quickly, shoulders stiff, lips pressed tight. She spotted me and made her way over without hesitation, though she looked like she hadn't slept since I left. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed with red, hair pulled back carelessly. She was wearing one of my old flannel shirts, the one she used to call her comfort armor. Seeing it on her now felt like a cruel joke. Hi, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. No welcome. No hostility. Just stillness. She reached across the table with trembling fingers, but I didn't move. She pulled her hand back. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, she said. I figured you needed space, but... She trailed off, waiting for me to fill the silence. I didn't. I know I should have called. I sent texts. Emails. But I didn't want to pressure you, she said quickly, like reading from a script. I just needed to see you. Face to face. Please. Let me talk. She took a shaky breath and dove in. I messed up, she said. I'm not going to lie about that. I've made so many mistakes. I was confused. I felt disconnected from myself, from us. And Jason, he felt like an escape. But it was never about love. It wasn't serious. I swear. It was pressure. Emotional fatigue. I know how that sounds, but I was falling apart inside and didn't know how to say it. I still hadn't said a word. She kept going. You were always so steady. So consistent. And I started to feel like I didn't deserve that. Like I was just pretending all the time. Pretending to be the version of myself you married. I didn't know how to come to you and say, I don't feel right. So I ran. I buried it in someone else. That last line hung in the air like a confession. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she added. I know I don't have the right, but I want you to understand. I wasn't trying to destroy us. I was just lost. Still, I said nothing. The silence between us grew thick, almost unbearable. She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers. Please, say something. I finally leaned back, took a sip of my coffee, and met her eyes. You want me to understand? I asked, voice steady. What exactly do you think I'm supposed to understand? She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. That you were confused? That you were hurting? That you felt disconnected? I scoffed quietly. You were connected enough to book a hotel room, to lie, to hide it from me for God knows how long. You didn't just wake up lost, Laura. You walked off the map on purpose. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't stop. I get that people drift. I get that marriage is work. But you didn't try to fix it. You didn't talk to me. You took the easiest path, the one that felt good in the moment, and you left me holding the pieces. And now what? You want a conversation? You want closure? You want forgiveness? Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. I shook my head slowly. This isn't a conversation anymore. You had a chance to be honest. That window closed. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter. I wrote this when I couldn't sleep. It's everything I couldn't say out loud. I didn't reach for it. Read it or don't. I had to leave it with you. I nodded once, but not out of agreement. Just acknowledgement. She stood slowly, placing the letter on the table between us. I love you, she said. I never stopped. I looked out the window. You stopped showing it. She lingered for a moment, then turned and walked out. I sat there, staring at the letter, not touching it. The waitress came over, asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head. She refilled my coffee anyway. Outside, Laura got into her car and sat for a few minutes before pulling away. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. The letter sat untouched on the table as the light outside dimmed. I finished my coffee slowly, the bitterness oddly comforting. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurting, but because something inside me had solidified. I wasn't the same man who sat in that motel parking lot days ago, stunned by a hotel receipt. That man was grieving a version of love he thought was real. This man was wide awake, and he wasn't going back. The next morning, I was sitting on a bench outside the motel with a takeout coffee when I saw her car pull in. Laura stepped out, wearing that same flannel shirt, her face pale and anxious. She spotted me, hesitated, then walked over. I know I'm pushing it, she said, but I couldn't leave it like that. I didn't respond, just looked at her. The coffee in my hands was cold by now, but I didn't move to replace it. She took a seat beside me, close enough for the air between us to shift. I didn't come to defend anything. I know I lost your trust. I need you to know it wasn't serious. It wasn't like I fell in love with him. It was a mistake. A really stupid, selfish mistake. I turned toward her. Would you have told me if I hadn't found the receipt? She blinked, didn't answer, and that silence told me everything. No, I said, voice low. You wouldn't have. She looked down. I was scared. No, I said again. You weren't scared. You just didn't think I'd ever find out. She wiped at her eyes, but I didn't feel moved anymore. There was no anger left in me. No urge to yell or demand apologies. Just absence. You're not here because you're sorry you broke us, I said. You're here because you're afraid of being alone. She started to speak, but I stood. I'm not coming back, I said. And you don't get to hold on to me while you figure yourself out. Her breath hitched, but I was already walking away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. It wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of the illusion I had been living in for far too long. Later that afternoon, I drove another few hours west to my brother's ranch. When I knocked on the door, he just raised an eyebrow and stepped aside to let me in. We hadn't spoken deeply in years, but sometimes family doesn't need words. That evening, we sat on the porch with cold beers, watching the sun dip into golden fields. He didn't ask what happened. He just passed me a second drink and said, "You can stay as long as you need." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Not that the pain was gone, but it wasn't raw anymore. It was just there. Heavy, sure, but mine. Not shared. Not distorted by someone else's narrative. In the days that followed, I helped him with odd jobs around the property. Fixing a fence, hauling supplies, chopping wood. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. Real. Every night, I'd sit out on that porch again and think about everything I'd given up in the name of stability. How much of myself I'd erased just to keep our routine afloat. I realized Laura hadn't been the only one who stopped trying. I had too, in my own way. I had settled for comfort, ignored the gaps forming between us, thinking they'd close on their own. But now, in this quiet stretch of country, I started thinking about what I wanted. Not what we were supposed to be. Not who I thought I had to be for her. Just me. No more walking on emotional eggshells. No more pretending that half-love was enough. There were no big revelations. No dramatic promises about the future. Just small things. A notebook filled with honest thoughts. A phone I didn't check obsessively. A few deep breaths under a wide, open sky. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of that.